Welcome to Sensing the Signal. I'm Terry Patar from Atreides. We're exploring the overlap between data, technology and intelligence in our increasingly volatile and complex world, what this means for national security, and how deeper insight can help organisations make better decisions. I've spent the past 20 years helping organisations improve their intelligence capabilities. I'm fascinated by how we understand the world around us. Now I get to talk to some of the leading voices who I've learned from myself.
On this episode, I talked to Kate Bondar, a fellow at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. Kate has recently published a series of research reports covering the development and acquisition of innovative technology by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, including command and control, C2, and unmanned systems, as well as the adoption of AI capability to augment these systems. We actually recorded our conversation on the 27th of February 2025, the day before President Zelensky of Ukraine met the US President in the White House in what turned out to be an extraordinary event. More on that at the end of the episode. So Kate, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Terry, thank you for having me here.
Oh, thank you for joining us. Perhaps we could actually start by talking a little bit about the current situation. You know, we're at the point now where we're 3 years since the Russian forces invaded Ukraine and sort of tried to launch their assault towards Kiev. And we've seen the war evolve a lot over the past 3 years, and right now a lot is up in the air in terms of what might happen next and what the peace settlements that are being negotiated may look like if they come about at all. Could you maybe just give some thoughts and impressions? I know it's very difficult in terms of trying to think about what might happen next, but just how you think what the current situation is.
Yeah, Terry, well, it's really hard to live in times of uncertainty, and this is exactly where we are right now, especially in terms of Ukrainian question and Ukrainian war. Unfortunately, the situation changes drastically every single day, and when we're trying to cover the situation here in Bodvani AI Center, it's really hard to even follow the events and to really understand the position of the parties. But unfortunately, Ukrainian position is getting less and less strong. So I just hope that the international dynamics and geopolitical dynamics will compose in such a way that Ukraine will have some negotiation flexibility and maneuverability, let's say. So yeah, let's hope for the better, but it's really hard to predict the situation right now.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's sort of universal right now. Everyone's watching all of those international developments play out and the geopolitics, etc. Especially since we've got this new US administration in place, and they're taking a very active role, shall we say, in what they're trying to push for in Ukraine. So I guess though, where I really want to delve into on this podcast is to talk about the technology aspects of what's happened in Ukraine over the past 3 years and what we've seen being developed and applied within the armed forces of Ukraine and the effect it's had on the battlefield. Now, you've done quite a bit of research on that, and I suppose it's important to say that it's not just technology that's been developed in the past few years. There's a background to it prior to that, especially when we think about the civilian technology expertise and capabilities that had grown up in Ukraine over the past 15 years or even longer. So maybe you can give us a sort of set the scene for us in terms of what the situation was in 2022 and how you've seen some of those key innovations play out. And I suppose during the conversation, we'll touch on the various aspects that you've highlighted in your research, which I think have been really important in terms of AI and unmanned systems and C2. And also maybe then we'll come on to talk a little bit about military acquisition. But let's start with the technology itself. I mean, how do you see that having started into 2022, and then kind of what were the key things that helped grow the innovation and capability since then?
Yeah, Terry, so first of all, I would like to remind our listeners that the war has started in 2014, and whenever we're talking about military technology and development of military technology, we should look back to that time and the war in Donbass, because this is when military technology in Ukraine has started to develop, actually. So yes, you're totally right. Ukraine has a very good talent pool and very developed IT sector with a lot of professionals. So that was the foundation, and I would say that was the basic factor which helped Ukrainian military to adopt commercial technology, technology coming from the private sector, fast and in efficient way after the full-scale invasion. So before the full-scale invasion, Ukrainian army found itself underfunded, without any sophisticated weapon systems, etc. And it still had the same enemy, Russia, but it just was located in Donbass, in the war in Donbass. So that war has actually mobilized this IT sector, professionals from IT sector, who realized that the warfighters on the front line need help, first of all, in situational awareness. And a lot of companies, a lot of volunteer groups and private persons, actually just IT guys from private sector, they united into these volunteer groups and started developing solutions enabling situational awareness on the front line. So basically, collecting information available open source in the media, aggregating it, integrating it, analyzing, and delivering the outputs to the warfighters through available devices like usual tablet or usual smartphone. And this is how the military and commercial sector and private sector has started their approach. By the way, the very famous right now war of drones and drone systems, they also started to develop and being deployed quite actively during the war in Donbass since 2000, I would say almost 15, and from both sides. Russia just had more resources to buy those Chinese drones and test them and deploy them on the front line. I wouldn't say even deploy, just soldiers were using them to see what's happening behind the hill, and Ukrainians were doing the same. It just wasn't in such a big scale, but the root and grassroots initiatives started right there. So by the time the full-scale invasion happened, both militaries already knew these techniques and tactics. It's just that the scale of this invasion and this war provoked the scale up of these technologies and broader deployment on the front line. And this attracted attention of donor organizations and volunteer organizations who started focusing on these technologies and started attract funding, collect donations to improve this aspect. And this is how it all started. And there's also a very important factor that I would like to mention, is that when the full-scale invasion happened, Ukrainian army drafted everyone almost. A lot of people volunteered, yes, to go to the army, and they had different professions. So people from different professions with different skill sets found themselves in one trench, for example. And when they had to use whatever is available off the shelf, they applied their creativity, and that's how they came up with just attaching an explosive device to a drone or a bomb to a drone, or better camera to use it as ISR drone, etc. So these two factors of availability of the-shelf products like drones from drone racing industry, let's say FPV drones, and people who were able to use them and knew how to deploy them, these two factors combined actually provoked and made a foundation for this full-scale deployment of unmanned systems.
So it was kind of taking the skills and expertise that had been built up, I guess, since 2014, as you said, and bringing some of that together from not just from a military perspective, but I suppose as the full-scale invasion took place, you then, as you said, had different people coming into the military with different types of experience and skills and expertise, and all combining together to create these capabilities. But I think what's been really important has been, and again, I'd love to get your view on this, how it kind of happened in sort of pockets of innovation, I suppose, rather than it being kind of coordinated centrally or on a mass basis. So could you maybe sort of describe how some of that occurred, and some of the systems that came and capabilities that came out of it, whether it's with the unmanned systems or perhaps with the sort of C2 capabilities as well?
Yeah, so C2 capabilities came out from those volunteer groups and volunteer projects that I described before. And Ukrainian military and the Ministry of Defense saw a huge potential in these systems. And they actually made a decision to, let's say, acquire, but it wasn't like usual acquisition or, selling the product to the Ministry of Defense. No, they just adopted this system and made it a formally official system of the Ministry of Defense. And now they're actively deploying it across the whole front line, across all services, across the armed forces. So every warfighter has access to the same system. They also took a role, I would say, as enabler. So they are motivating Ukrainian drone producers to make systems which are compatible with this situational awareness system. And we call it situational awareness system, like usual name for it. But in fact, it is becoming a C2 system because it has some modules which help to coordinate, for example, operations of unmanned systems. And it's not only aerial systems, it's aerial systems for conducting reconnaissance missions and coordinating with ground systems to actually execute the mission. So basically, this system is slowly transforming in a real C2 system, and Ukrainian military is targeting to close the kill chain with the help of this system. Speaking about unmanned systems and like bottom-up approach, this is actually true due to the factors that I have already described. But also, what is important is that Ukrainian government, I don't know, without probably any sophisticated strategy or intention, again, took a role of enabler. So instead of developing its own systems, investing in R&D, developing concepts and prototypes and testing them, they just kind of opened the door for private companies, for commercial sector to develop, to test, and to deploy their systems faster. And to enable this, they actually made a lot of amendments and changes to the regulation of acquisition process. So previously, it was taking, I would say, 10 years from requirements for from requirements formation, where the military comes up with the requirements and till the system is deployed. Now it takes up to a year. So the Ukrainian military, yes,
wow,
10 times. Yes, of course, there is existential need for that, but it's a smart move, instead of taking this burden of developing, and usually governments are not very effective and efficient in developing something rapidly and iterating fast. So by enabling this rapid development and quick iteration, Ukrainian got this edge in technology, in military technology.
I think that's really interesting because it's not just relevant to what's happened in Ukraine, but like you said there, rapid innovation just isn't often very rapid or innovative in other countries as well. And so when you said 10 years, I mean, that's obviously a long time, but I mean, even in other countries, typically it could be a year, 2 years, more than 2 years often, from requirements to actually acquiring something that can meet the requirement. So yes, in certain circumstances, the things can move faster, etc. But typically, there's a long delay, a long gap between that happening. So the fact that that's been shortened and can happen much faster, like you said, has been really important, and really impressive. And I think, again, that's something that other countries can perhaps take away from how Ukraine has dealt with this existential situation. But still, it's something that could be taken and perhaps applied and adopted elsewhere. And I think that's really important because of the pace of technology change that we've seen. Not just in defense and security technology or military technology, but in commercial, technology as well. And so some of the capabilities that you've written about in your research, AI, for example, AI systems, it feels like we're talking about all the time or hearing about all the time because we're seeing something else happening in the, commercial space every few months or even quicker than that. And so adopting those kinds of technologies and making use of them in a quick turnaround is really important. But I guess key to that as well was, as you said, this for me is still a really interesting dynamic that you have kind of volunteer groups essentially creating things that then get adopted centrally by the military. Maybe you could talk us through an example and one that's had a lot of impact. I'm thinking, in terms of and I should have stopped to explain acronyms. I'm always terrible with acronyms, but when we talk about C2, we're talking about command and control. And I suppose when you're describing the difference between a tool that's created for situational awareness, that's really just collecting information, putting it in one place and helping people understand what's going on. Whereas when you transition to command and control, I suppose the key aspect there is communication and being able to send orders from one unit to another, or communicate messages. In terms of the C2 situation, that's been an area that's particularly interesting, I think, because along with unmanned systems, because these are all areas that other militaries and countries are trying to build up at the same time. And I think the advances that Ukraine has made can be really instructive. So perhaps you could touch on a couple of examples in those spaces that you think have been particularly instructive and talk us through how they developed.
Yeah, so we already started talking about Delta system, which the Ministry of Defense has adopted, and I think it would be logical to continue this example because they have really interesting cases and approaches that I would like to highlight and discuss. So first of all, again, they realized that it's going to be impossible for the ministry as a government institution to start and building a sophisticated software, because usually this is what is happening in commercial sector. So the approach that they have taken is to actually separating some specific functions, let's say, and basically outsourcing them to commercial sector or volunteer organizations. For example, what I mean, it started as a situational awareness, system. And to ensure that this situational awareness is comprehensive, you need to collect information from various sources. So one of the sources is drones and satellite imaging. And speaking about innovative technologies that help to improve the systems, and actually what is valuable in situational awareness is proximity to real-time processing. So you have to be aware what is happening on the front line and around the front line almost in real time. The closer, the better. It saves lives. It gives you understanding what is happening right now in this second. And the speed of analysis of these information streams, this is what is important. And human being simply is unable to process that amount of information that Ukrainian military collects. And this is where AI helps and comes into picture and solves this problem. So going back to drone footage and satellite imaging, Ukrainian military uses AI extensively to analyze these huge amounts, like 10 to 12 petabytes of information monthly. So that's really a lot. And it's not even analyzing everything, like all incoming information. they focus and they apply AI only to those cases where a human being cannot process it really well. So, for example, it's a very small object, or if the picture is taken from a satellite or a picture is taken from high altitude drone, and you really need to focus to find that hidden small little piece of equipment, or troops hiding in the bushes, for example. And this is where they analyze this sort of video and photo imaging with the help of AI. When we're talking about, for example, acoustic systems, Ukraine has some companies, private companies, and they collaborate with private companies who deploy their microphones along the front line, and they help to capture the sound, and with the help of AI, analyze that sound right on the spot, like where the microphone is, and to transmit information and to transfer information to this Delta system already in pre-analyzed way. So they basically transmit output rather than just straight away a lot of acoustic information. What type of a drone or missile system is coming, from which side, which direction it's flying, etc., etc. And it all adds to other types of information already aggregated in the system. In addition to that, they receive a lot of text information from group chats, from intercepted communications of Russian forces, from reports of civilians. And you also need to analyze that type of information very fast because it's massive amount of text information. And this is where LLMs come into picture and really help to do that. So all these sources are processed with the help of AI. It's to some extent, and AI helps to bring already outputs rather than just raw information, just raw data, which for human being it's just impossible to process. And it all aggregates in one place, and then the actual output is placing objects on the digital map, which is available to every soldier on the front line. So this is how it works. This is how, these are particular cases where technology really enhances the efficiency of the big system. And it's a very interesting approach that Ukrainian military has taken, because usually militaries are very big and closed organizations, and they're trying to build their secret, classified mega programs or huge platforms which try to solve all the problems, which try to analyze all information, and usually it takes years and billions of dollars to develop that. But Ukraine has separated these streams, let's say, outsourced them to private companies and volunteer organizations, and they just collect actual results, aggregate them, and that's why it happens really fast and it's really close to real-time output.
And this is really amazing, and that's a great explanation, the way you've described the Delta system there. I mean, I've heard other people describe it in the past, and I don't think any other explanation has ever quite described it with such clarity. So thank you for that. And I think what you've talked about there is a capability that other countries have been talking about trying to develop and adopt for some time. I mean, we hear a lot in the US, for instance, about the joint all-domain command and control systems, the sort of JADC2s. Again, those are being developed by some of the biggest defense companies you can think of. And I don't think it's been yet, that problem has not yet been fully solved, at least not to the same extent perhaps that it has been in Ukraine. And so that system in particular is really interesting. And I think I'm right in saying that in your research you highlighted as well how it had been kind of developed prior to 2022, so before the full-scale invasion, but as you touched on earlier, in response to some of the things that had occurred since 2014, since the war began, and then it was sort of developed several years prior to 2022. Is that right? And it was kind of tested and adopted.
That's absolutely correct. And again, one more factor which really pushed the development of this technology, especially when we're talking about drones and unmanned systems, is what is called in military as forward deployed engineers. Mm-hmm. What is in Ukrainian realities are just friends and connections, and there's someone who is in the trenches on the front line in every family, and you have someone. So whenever you are trying to develop something new, you have someone to call to and ask, like, hey, we have a drone here, could you please test it? And Ukrainian military, of course, is very open to test basically anything that helps to kill Russians, let's say.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, and that's also very important because it speeds up the development process very fast and iteration process very fast. Everyone was talking about like very short innovation cycles, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, a month. And it's relevant, it's valid for hardware systems, like the drone as a platform for like hardware. But if we're talking about software, it's even more interesting because currently the drones are equipped with chips, with some sort of really, like the software which is getting more and more sophisticated. And you can update that software remotely. So sometimes innovation happens during the day or during like couple of times a day. And this is really interesting because it helps to keep this advantage comparing to Russian forces. And also this advantage gives, for example, why there is such a race, because to reverse engineer some hardware solutions are way faster than to reverse engineer some software solutions. And Russians are really good in reverse engineering anything that they can get. And that's why we see this iteration and, going very fast. And whenever it appears on any side of the front line is repeated and replicated very quickly on the other side. With software, it's a bit more complicated because you get a drone with a chip, it's encrypted, and it's really hard to get the code, actually understand how it works. So developing software part of unmanned systems is what can really, advance the technology and keep this advancement. So that's why Ukrainian military has also realized it, and they're trying to push more on software development rather than hardware improvements.
That's, again, another key area to touch on, because, and we discussed this previously in terms of the software being the vital area of innovation where the advantage can happen. And, you've described it really well there. What can other countries and other militaries learn from what you've described there in terms of, let's say, for example, how the Delta system has been developed, but also the turnaround speed in terms of how innovation's required at the front lines, and how important software is compared to, say, hardware development? What are the takeaways? What are the lessons that others should be drawing out as you're talking through it and describing this?
Yeah, for my reports and for my research, I conduct a lot of interviews with both European and US companies, private companies. And it's really interesting for me to hear what they learned from, their experience or their ideas, or, when they're thinking that direction. And they all come up with more or less the same conclusion, is that you really need battlefield testing. And because no testing in laboratories, in labs, or in testing ranges, even close to real battlefield conditions, cannot give you the relevant, like 100% relevant feedback on performance of your system in the real battlefield conditions. And that's why probably you heard about, failures of U.S. drone companies in the beginning of the war. When they sent their drones to the front line, they were not working, they were just falling from the sky. Mm-hmm. And that explains why you need battlefield testing. One of the reasons why this happened, for example, with U.S. drones is because they are developed according to U.S. military requirements. And knowing how this process works, it takes really long for those requirements to actually be implemented in a real product. So some of the drones, actually most of them, which are currently available or were available for the beginning of this full-scale invasion, were developed according to requirements coming from Afghanistan and Iraq, etc. So the thing is, in those conflicts, there was no such electronic warfare so intensive as in this war. And when they sent their drones to Ukrainian battlefield, of course, they were falling from the sky because they were not prepared, they were not ready for this kind of countermeasures. And there are a lot of different factors, starting from weather, finishing with operator skills, etc., which made the situation more complicated. So they all said, if you want the system for really to work on the battlefield, you need to test it right there. And that's why many companies were trying to open offices in Ukraine, or just at least hire some engineers who can bring their drones to the front line and get real feedback from their performance. And they try to do it constantly because, as we said, it's constant innovation, updating, and iteration.
Well, this is what I guess companies and other militaries have to get used to, is that pace of innovation that you describe, which is it's going to differ from one situation to another, one area of operations to another, whether it's this type of conflict or a different type. And they've got to be prepared, I suppose, to innovate at that pace, daily or sometimes even multiple times a day, to ensure capabilities continue functioning and that they're not interrupted or disrupted in some way.
Right. By the way, sorry to interrupt you, Terry. There's one more interesting initiative that Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has taken, and it's very relevant probably to lessons learned and for other militaries to consider. So Ukrainian government in general is very digitalized. We know that, they have this DIA program and app where all the documents and a lot of public services are in digital format. We have special ministry of digital transformation, etc., etc. But the Ministry of Defense also have their specific work stream on digitalizing all the internal processes, paperwork, reporting from the front line, people management, etc., etc. So one of the most recent initiatives that they have taken, they have developed an app which is installed almost on every phone of every military person. They made this feedback and testing available through that app. So actually, any manufacturer can request testing on the battlefield, and they send immediate reports through this app to the manufacturer, and they can send pictures, they can just describe what's happening, they can send, different indicators, parameters, whatever is needed for that. So they fully automated this process, they digitalized it, and basically, again, it speeds up and it improves this process of getting feedback from the battlefield. And I think this is kind of innovative idea which is not implemented in any military of the world, but it would be really, really precious for manufacturers to know the feedback of end users, and on constant basis, not just once in a while some engineer comes, makes a test, makes a report and goes away. So it's constant update on the performance, what goes well, what goes not very well, conditions change, battlefield situation changes, weather condition changes, and it provides a manufacturer with constant feedback. So I think it's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that's a lot more complex in some ways than what people might imagine. It would be involved in deploying a technology and seeing how it performs. But actually, if the digital infrastructure is there and the capability is there, that can be pretty straightforward, I guess, with the kind of current capabilities that are in place. And so, yeah, that's superb in terms of that description of what's required and how those updates can happen so rapidly. I wanted to maybe sort of just ask you. I'd always like to ask guests on the podcast a little bit about how you got into this area and how you ended up doing this research, and has it just for you been driven by events since the full-scale invasion or since the war, or I know you've worked in kind of private sector consulting into government in the past. I know from my experience that can often be quite challenging, but it would be great just to get a sense of how you kind of found yourself researching and writing about these topics.
Yeah, so I have a mix and combination of experiences. I was working in private sector, as you said, and it was Microsoft. Then after Revolution of Dignity, I was working for the Ukrainian government for 10 years. Started with financial sector and then switched to defense. And basically I was implementing a project in the Ministry of Defense on approaching with NATO standards, which gave me a really good comprehensive understanding what is happening inside Ukrainian military and how allied militaries work, how DoD works, how European partners forces I would say work. So yeah, it's
is that a case of how they work and how they don't work?
Yeah,
as well,
yeah, that's what I wanted to say, but decided to skip it.
No, that's perfectly fair.
Yeah, efficiencies and inefficiencies. Let's call it that way. Yeah, so by the time when the full-scale invasion started, I was in Europe, and it was really interesting to see how the attitude changed, during the first couple of weeks, basically, because yes, it's true there was a sense that nothing's going to work out. It's just 3 days, and Kyiv will fall, and should we actually do anything about it? But then Ukraine showed that it's capable and willing to fight, and positions of allied partners started to consolidate around actually helping Ukraine. Yes, that was very interesting experience to see this drastic change of policy shifts and opinions, probably. So, and then I moved to United States because had some friends here due to my previous work, and I was just, I was thinking, how can I help my country from here? What can I do? And I think that doing this research and delivering message to U.S. military and allied forces, where Ukrainian advances, where Ukrainian military is strong, and where it has gaps and need help. That was the gap I wanted to fill with my research, and that's how I came up with this. And the topics, they come up in conversations with people. People are the best resource for actually understanding the current needs, demands, and to hit that need, to satisfy that demand is probably the most precious, when you know that someone really needs your research and it gives relevant information and it's valuable for both sides. So this is where I find the most motivation and satisfaction when I do that research, and it's in demand, and it can hopefully change something, or at least contribute to some positive decisions, both for Ukraine and for Western partners.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what everyone hopes for when they're publishing research, is that it leads to hopefully somebody making positive decisions that will have a good impact. But it's really interesting to hear your background and how you've found yourself doing this research. And maybe we can also circle back to the research that you're publishing with CSIS, which is a part of a program, you're taking a structured program of research reports. And could you maybe just talk us through the topics you've covered so far? And I think am I right in saying you've got another one coming out soon?
Yes. So I decided to start with presenting, Ukrainian military AI ecosystem. So I'm focused on exploring and researching AI in military and defense here at CSIS. So I decided to present to the audience what the ecosystem consists of, what are the government stakeholders, who are private companies and funds, and where the funding comes from, etc. So just to kind of set the stage for follow-up research. Then I decided to focus on CJATC2 because, again, from conversations with people, I realized that this is something that might be interesting, and I felt and saw how the approaches differ here in the United States and in Ukraine. And I was like, okay, there's something interesting that I can deliver and attract attention to Ukrainian experience and probably get some resources to further develop it. So that's why I decided to write a report about Ukrainian CJATC2 prototype, let's say, or maybe even a working system. So it's developing, and there was a big discussion. Does Ukraine really already has this CJATC2 system? And then I switched to acquisition because everyone was wondering how commercial technology actually gets to the battlefield, how this happens, why this happens so fast, which factors contributed to this scale up and speed up of this deployment. So that was my next choice, and the most probably interesting report, which comes up pretty soon, I think next week, is report on military AI applications and the state of autonomy on the battlefield. And this is where everyone starts talking about AI wars and killer robots. Yeah. And when should we be afraid already or not?
Yeah. Could you maybe give us some insights into that topic? As you know, by the time I think the podcast is available for people, the report will be out. But it'll be great just to hear from you. Kind of, what did you research and find?
So the spoiler is that we're pretty far from killer robots and fully autonomous
That's not a spoiler.
weapons.
I'm glad about that.
Yes. So we have some time to think how we can actually save ourselves. But no, we're pretty far from fully autonomous weapon systems deployed on the front line. And the actual goal of the Ukrainian military is to remove a warfighter from direct combat because Ukraine is running out of people, it has constrained resources, and that's why Ukrainian military wants to replace people with unmanned systems, robots. But for them to execute missions efficiently, they really need a higher level of autonomy. So now, when I started my interviews and I started actually mapping this process of how we approach to autonomous weapon systems, I realized that there are parallel work streams and parallel directions that technologies are developing, and I just call it like a partial deployment of autonomy. What I mean is that basically companies focused on solving smaller particular issues which are existent on the front line, and to tackle those and address those issues separately. So for example, there's a bunch of companies who want to improve ATR, automated targeting, for example. So again, it's software which is AI powered, which is AI enabled, and it uses basically computer vision to detect targets and classify objects faster, better, with higher efficiency. Where this is used, so for example, an operator flies the drone to a square or where they know that the targets are preliminary, and then they see it through a drone, and drone actually helps them to classify the targets instead of just transmitting a video. And this technology helps to lock on the target and then execute, for example, last mile approach, final approach, again with the help of AI, but in a bit different way. It's autonomous navigation. So, for example, autonomous navigation is also a separate work stream that other companies are working on. So they're trying to solve different problems, and then
so they're all,
there are,
yeah,
and
okay.
and then there are drone producers who buy these separate pieces of software and actually integrate into their hardware platforms in such a way, trying to make this system as autonomous as possible. But now, for now, what is deployed on the front line, I'm not speaking about testing.
Mm-hmm.
What is deployed is this partial autonomy, and some systems are enabled with ATR, some systems are enabled with autonomous navigation, some systems with both, etc., etc. But for now, we're pretty far from fully autonomous weapon systems on the front line.
Okay, that's really interesting, actually, in terms of that insight into what's happening that effectively builds on the work that's been done previously with unmanned systems, with the C2, but then starts layering in some of those different AI capabilities, as you said, sort of focusing on one part of the, I guess, the solution, or the solution that needs to be built, but focusing on one part of the problem at a time and bringing those together for integration. I mean, it sounds like quite a complex challenge to create that type of system and get it working. But as you said, if it's on the battlefield and it's being used and tested and implemented, I suppose there's a lot of iteration that can take place as it comes into use more and more.
Yeah, and I track this by procurement process in Ukraine, for example, because partially it's conducted through open auctions and open system, so you can actually see what Ukrainian military procures. And just to give you a sense of how this happens, so only in 2024 they started to procure systems enabled with autonomous functions, let's call it this way.
Mm-hmm.
So Ukraine claims that they have contracted around 2 million drones in 2024. So only 10,000 drones out of those 2 million were enabled with, it's called automated targeting. So basically it has some autonomous navigation functions and targeting functions, AI enabled. So for now, it's a small fraction, but it's a start. So in 2024, Ukraine started procuring these systems. It didn't buy any kind of these systems before, and of course, in 2025, they aim to scale it up, to increase this portion and ratio of autonomous systems on the front line. And from what I heard in like private conversations, is that they aim to increase it up to 50%. So half of the unmanned systems on the front line, and we're talking about aerial systems right now,
Sure,
are supposed to be with some sort of autonomy.
Wow. Okay, that's yeah. I mean, that's impressive development in terms of the rate of bringing it into actually using it. How much of that is being built and developed within Ukraine, and versus kind of the level of foreign assistance or assistance from foreign companies? I know it's sometimes difficult to pick out because, as you said, a lot of foreign companies will have opened up in Ukraine and recruited people within the country. But I know you touched upon it in your research, but the role of kind of foreign assistance from partners and etc., how much that's played in the sort of adoption of new technology and innovation, and is that still the case? And you know, what's the sort of mixture there?
So here I would prefer to speak about, again, unmanned systems and drones, because you know, foreign assistance, it's pretty easy. There are like open trackers and numbers on State Department and DoD websites. You can open the list and see. But with unmanned systems, it's more interesting because Ukraine is developing its own industry, and it's developing fast. So I can refer to numbers which were announced by the Minister of Defense, and he said that currently Ukraine is buying 96% of locally produced drones. So only 4% come as foreign assistance, or they buy from abroad, but most of the procurement is locally produced drones. And Ukraine has been targeting for localization of production, not to depend on foreign components and export controls, for example, imposed by China. So it's a pretty predictable outcome of their policy, and I think it's very logical to be self-sufficient in this aspect, especially taking the role of drones on the front line and in the battlefield. Ukraine is developing its own industry, and I think pretty successfully. And one of the factors which contribute to that is that Ukrainian systems are much, much cheaper than foreign analogs. And there is no guarantee that they work. And if you buy from Ukrainian manufacturers, you can always call the manufacturer from the front line if something's not working or you need to urgently repair something. The production is readily available, etc. So for Ukraine, it's cheaper, it's more convenient, and unfortunately, I even heard of cases when U.S. drones, for example, arrived and they stayed unpacked on the front line or somewhere in stock.
Okay.
Because when they open it, there's no one to train them, there's no one to explain how it works, and then if something breaks, they don't know who to call, who to ask for help. So there's some rationale behind buying Ukrainian, and Ukrainians are pretty successful in that.
Yeah, it sounds like a very sensible approach and a natural consequence of, as you said, some of the things that have happened. Have there been other impacts in terms of things like knowledge transfer restrictions? I know you've touched on that in your research, and maybe you can explain how that's impacted the development of capability a little bit. Just be interesting to touch on that briefly.
Yes, sure. So we have to realize that in Ukraine there are two parts of military industry. One is state-owned Soviet legacy enterprises, and they're mostly united under one umbrella, which is called Ukroboronprom, and they're managed by a separate ministry which was created to manage this huge conglomerate of military enterprises. And these enterprises, they produce conventional systems, missiles, air defense, etc., etc. So these are the systems which require a lot of R&D, time, effort, money, and basically they're like Soviet legacy systems. And the second part is this private new industry, commercial technology, where knowledge transfer happens really fast and faster. But when we're talking about technology transfer and knowledge transfer from abroad, of course, every country is keeping its secrets, and Ukraine was part of Soviet bloc, so there was no technology transfer with state-owned industry. And unfortunately, it was, again, after the Soviet Union has broken, there was underfunded, and a lot of talented engineers actually migrated abroad. So there's a lot of issues there. But now they're trying to start developing this industry again. But there is no active technology transfer with that part of the industry, unfortunately. And kind of it's understandable because there is a lot of risks over there, and I understand the position of Western partners, and these risks, they range starting from corruption in Ukraine to Russian military espionage, which is very common, unfortunately, but yes, Russia is working on this as well, and just physical risks of something being stolen or destroyed, or worse come to worse if, Russia advances that far that it gets these enterprises, so it will get access to Western technology, which is unacceptable, of course. So this is one part of blocking factors for technology transfer from Western countries. But when we're talking about commercial technology, again, Ukraine doesn't have those resources like venture capital, for example, like here in United States. Ukraine doesn't have time to invest a lot in commercial technology development. And that's why the innovation which happens in this commercial and private sector, especially in drones and unmanned systems, it's mostly based on open source technology. Computer vision tech, you can go online and get it for free, basically. And Ukrainians just are very good in adapting and adopting these technologies in their solutions. So unfortunately, I cannot say that this is something like deep tech, high tech developments which are really innovative. And this is partially the reason why it's really hard for Ukrainian companies to attract foreign investment, because foreign investors are looking for some real innovation which can be protected and which can provide you some competitive advantage years to come,
so
right?
Kind of new IP, essentially.
Yes. So unfortunately, they cannot find it in Ukrainian startups and Ukrainian young companies because they mostly use readily available technologies. So that's a small little issue. But now they're starting to invest more into this R&D, and I hope in future Ukrainian technologies will become more sophisticated and attractive for foreign investments.
So Kate, in terms of the way that Ukraine has developed this technology, adopted it, deployed it, and you've mentioned the change in speed of acquisition, that must take a pretty significant shift of mindset. How can that sort of be described, I suppose, in a way that you think others might also appreciate how that's happened, I suppose, from the people that you've spoken to and the research that you've done, how have they shifted that mindset, and how can we understand that?
Yeah, of course, when a war comes to your country and nobody can stay away kind of this topic, right? You're right in the middle of the war. So every Ukrainian had to rethink very quickly his or her attitude to this current situation. And people changed their mindset, from their basically everyday usual life to a military and life in the war. And everyone adapted as much as they could. Someone went directly to fight, someone made huge donations, someone was just cooking food, or, everyone was contributing the way people could. But in terms of technology development and military development, this change and mobilization of the whole population actually helped to provide this first need, especially like in first half a year, where we all heard about this drones assembled in the kitchens and women shooting down Russian drones with cucumbers or something. And I don't know if it's true or not, but there were cases reported when they were just throwing into drones anything they could throw. So this mobilization, this change of mindset from your usual life to wartime really helped Ukrainians to mobilize resources before the foreign aid has come, before the foreign weapons has come, and to sustain this first hardest time. And then, of course, contributing your talents, contributing your skills to the military, to the armed forces, to people who you know and who went to the front line, and to help them with everything they need. This was also a factor which helped not only sustain but build the basis for future military and defense industry. And that's how it converted into those startups. And those startups, attracted first funding from, again, FFF, family, fools and friends.
Right.
So basically, this change nurtured this huge explosion of defense technology, defense capabilities, and capacity of Ukrainian military to produce enough weapons to not to win the war, but at least to save the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked there about the impact on people across Ukraine's population, etc. Maybe, you can talk a little bit about how it's affected you and what you've seen from your own personal experience.
Of course, yeah. My situation is a bit interesting in this aspect, because I was born in Donetsk, which is the capital of Donbass, and I moved to Kiev in 2006, so it wasn't related to war of 2014. But I felt, and my family felt, that this is a very pro-Russian region, and Russian propaganda is everywhere, and those narratives, they're really imposing. So that's why we just made a decision to move to Kiev, more free, pro-Western part of Ukraine. And I have a lot of friends and relatives who stayed there in that part, and we're not in touch, we're not talking to each other. And it's a very common situation when, families are broken, let's say, and they stop talking to each other and they separate on this ideological divide, let's say. Yeah, and when the full-scale invasion happened, it was just a complete cut off from everyone I knew on that part, and being ideologically aligned with Russia, first of all. And this actually provoked and motivated me even more to support those people who went to protect my country, protect Ukraine. And well, I'm a girl, maybe I'm not very efficient on the front line, but there was a moment of time where I was sitting and thinking, what can I personally do right here and right now to help people? So, of course, first of all, I donated a lot for Ukrainian army. That's what all Ukrainians do. I was based in Europe, and I was, going across Europe, meeting with people who I knew from my previous job, and just trying to kind of explain what is happening, consolidate their position around helping Ukraine. Basically trying to deliver the message that we're going to fight, and please help us to sustain at least the first hardest days. And I hope that contributed somehow to changing of minds of European partners towards helping Ukraine. Yeah, and with the time, when time was going, I still kept asking the same question: how should I live my life, and how my further, path and the way I choose can help my country to survive and fight this war, because that's my home. I want to be back one day. So yeah, and that's how I ended up here and spreading the message, delivering the message about Ukraine, about Ukrainian realities, about how strong and brave we are. And this is probably what every Ukrainian is trying to do. And I hope to make my small contribution into this.
Thanks so much for talking through that, because I think we've all seen the strength and bravery of the Ukrainian people, and it's always touching when you hear about it from somebody who has their own perspective on it and you've experienced it. But I think, as you said, it really is important, because that's it's not just about the technology, it's not just about the capabilities that we've been discussing, but it is about that impact on everybody within the country. And thank you for describing that. And leaving aside some of the geopolitical and international negotiations that might be going on, if, for example, the war continues, what are going to be the really important areas that the Ukrainian Armed Forces need to focus on in terms of their capabilities, and in particular around some of the technologies that we've talked about, and how do you see that kind of playing out?
Yeah, so I think no matter how this negotiation or ceasefire or whatever it would be plays out, Ukraine has to be self-sufficient and has to rely on itself and to be able to defend itself. And that would be the main and the strongest security guarantee it can ever have. It doesn't even matter if foreign military will be deployed or some European troops, peacekeeping troops will be deployed. Ukraine has to be self-sufficient, and I hope and I see that inside Ukraine this understanding is also common, and they're moving in this direction. So as I said, Ukraine needs to get back its talent pool because a lot of people migrated abroad. Unfortunately, a lot of talented people are killed on the front line, and these are patriots. These are people who most of them, many of them, went to war voluntarily, and Ukraine is losing its most talented and most patriotic human capital. Unfortunately. So the sooner this killing stops, unfortunately I have to quote this quote, but it's really important so Ukraine can focus and reallocate this human capital and human resource into basically technology development and scaling up production, because production is the deterrence, The more equipped Ukrainian army is, the better. The more time it has to develop technology, the better. And the more resources it has is also the better. So these are three factors that Ukraine needs to focus on. And I think this would provide the best security guarantee ever. And for Ukraine, this is existential need. And that's why all effort has to be put into this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think from all of those of us working in the technology space in countries that are partnered with Ukraine and aligned with Ukraine, I think we all hope that there will be an end to the conflict, but that whatever settlement is not detrimental to Ukraine, and that, as you said, that in terms of the things we've talked about, the technology and especially for the defence and military applications, that there is that level of, I guess taking what you've described as is some of the sort of startup level capabilities that have already been adopted, applied, and have reached a pretty high level of capability. But there's probably still a lot that I guess could be taken from that startup stage to scaling up, and that, as you said, is the big challenge there, I guess. So yeah, I mean that's I guess what comes next, I suppose.
Right, and in a more peaceful time, these startups, they because these technologies, they're not only defense or military, especially when we're talking about unmanned systems enabled with AI. Autonomous drones are used widely in agriculture, in delivery, in some peaceful commercial applications and sectors. So these companies actually have a very good basis to become just strong commercial companies and go to international market. And if their drones are electronic warfare resistant, maybe that will help them to work efficiently, for example, in monitoring borders or checking the condition of infrastructural big objects like bridges, or working in the airports, or there's a lot of applications for these technologies, because most of them are dual use. So I think, and I see a huge potential for Ukrainian currently defense industry to become a basis for economic development and economic growth in Ukraine, of Ukraine, and actually go into international market and being very competitive with foreign manufacturers and producers.
Okay, that's a really nice kind of optimistic note to probably end the conversation on, and I think that's really introduced kind of an element of hope that there will be something brighter in the future for Ukraine and for the technology that's being created there. So Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining me on this podcast. And it's been fascinating to talk to you. And I think you've really touched on some important examples. And I know we've sort of skimmed the level of depth that you've produced in your research. So, I would encourage anyone who's listening, who's interested, to go to the Centre for Strategic and International Studies website and download those reports and delve into them. But thank you so much again for your time and for coming on and talking to us on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
And that was the end of our conversation back on Thursday, the 27th of February. As I said in the intro, the next day there was a seismic meeting in the Oval Office, and we saw the very public breakdown of relations between Ukraine and the US. In the days that followed, there was this real scramble to see what might happen next and what it would mean for Ukraine. We wanted to get Kate's perspective on that event and what it would mean for Ukraine. So we invited her back and we caught up again on Friday the 7th of March, a week on from the White House row. Here's our conversation. Kate, thanks for joining us again. It's been quite a week. It's been a week since the meeting in the White House between President Zelensky and President Trump. What are your thoughts and how has your week been since then? It would be great just to get your reaction to what's happening, and bearing in mind, obviously, that this is very much a moving picture and we are seeing changes day by day. But where we are now, it would be great just to understand your response really to what's gone on.
Yeah, hi Terry. Hi, glad to hear you again, and thank you for continuing this conversation. So yeah, of course, it was a really intense week. We had news every single day, and the last Friday was a blast. Well, my opinion, and especially right after the events on Friday, probably is not very common for a Ukrainian, but when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, that's a huge mistake that Ukrainians have done. Because, we all saw the preparation for this deal. We all understand who the President Trump is and, some specifics of his character and personality. And Ukrainian delegation was prepared, and it was prepared by the U.S. side, it was prepared by Ukrainian advisors. So everyone kind of understood the scenario they should follow, but unfortunately it didn't happen so. So, President Zelensky is not just a president, is not just like a leader and a hero by himself. He is a leader of a nation, and he has people and nation behind him. So when he came here to sign this deal, he should have followed this scenario. Mr. Zelensky is an actor, so that press conference, he had to do his job, basically, and to get what he needs for his people. He had to sign a deal. I know it's bad. I know it doesn't have all the points and security guarantees that Ukrainians drastically need. And, in terms of facts and arguments, Zelensky was right, but unfortunately, Mr. Trump was right in terms of he wasn't in a position to, show power and educate Trump in his Oval Office on how the deals should be made and what Ukraine needs, unfortunately. So when I saw that on Friday, I'm like, okay, that's going to be, really bad for Ukrainian people and for those who really need ammunitions and who need to protect their skies and to protect their homes, etc. And I think the President Zelensky should have thought about it when he was speaking at the press conference. And of course, many experts agree, and everyone agrees that kind of conversations are possible, but behind closed doors. And, all the consequences that we saw during the week, it's logical continuation and consequence and conclusion and result of that big, offense that President Trump got in his office. So again, returning to his personality, he loves flattery, he loves attention, he needs communication for his internal audience, And this was kind of expected that these actions would follow the events on Friday. So, but on the positive side, I think that it's all manageable, it's temporary, and even the Trump administration and officials from his administration told multiple times that, hey, it's temporary, let's discuss, let's talk, and let's sign the deal and move on, and, let's start from there. So apparently it will take a bit of time to mend that, relationship, but for now, it's kind of inevitable, and both sides are kind of open to this. They just need to find a way to sit around one table and come to some common vision and common conclusions and start from signing probably a deal which would build trust first and start from there.
Yeah, that's a really interesting take. And I think, especially if we focus more on the outcome, it definitely was not the outcome that either side wanted. And it felt like it got very caught up in the kind of personal dynamics of the moment of, you've probably got a group of people having a discussion and everyone's highly tense and there's a lot riding on it, etc. It's a very high pressured situation, but I know it's difficult as well because, like you said, these kind of discussions and negotiations may well have happened between different governments and administrations in the past, but we wouldn't see it. It wasn't in front of the media. It was, so having seen that and for that to be visible was really quite, eye-opening for us, I think. But also, it made it have maybe more of an impact than it would have been had it just been an announcement after the discussions. If they'd have just come out with a simple statement saying the deal wasn't signed, there are more discussions to be had or something, we wouldn't necessarily have taken it away as we did collectively across the world when we were watching. But it, as you said, there are some encouraging things that have come since then. I think do you feel more optimistic based on the response of some of the European nations and the UK in particular over the kind of subsequent weekend? Has that sort of helped, do you think?
It's really great to have support of Europe, and for Europe, again, it's another wake-up call that probably it's the end of that close relations as they used to be before, that Europe has to stand up, build its own defense, probably sacrifice some welfare in favor of building warfare to be able to defend itself against any type of threat. And maybe it's even a good thing for Europe to finally become fully independent and self-sufficient and resilient to this kind of unexpected changes in policy and foreign policy of the closest allies. But going back to Ukraine, it's really good that Europe stand up. But in terms of practical steps, it will take a lot of time for Europe to actually deliver those capabilities and deliver those promises that were announced. Because if we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars, again, if you go into details behind those big announcements, you see that they will be provided, for the next 5-6 years, for example. Or if the British Prime Minister comes and says, yes, Europe will stand up for Ukraine, etc., but with the backing of the United States. And that's basically what we heard. So European support comes with the backing of the United States, and it all goes back to one single person. So that's why I think Ukraine made that mistake. But again, there is a way out, and there is a way to build that relationship and restore that relationship. It's never going to be a friendship or something, but at least, if Trump wants to get back to realpolitik, like very pragmatic, measurable policy, it is possible. It is possible. Ukraine just needs to adjust its strategy and its way they do kind of business with the United States, go into a very practical steps, practical plan with measurable results and measurable offering that they're making to the United States, and that's the language that Trump administration understands. Because it's never been a secret that Mr. Trump comes from real estate, and he used to closing the deals as in real estate. The only thing he doesn't realize is that in foreign policy, you don't have any external law enforcement authority. Like if something goes wrong in real estate, you just go to a court and someone is going to enforce the decision and, kind of figure it out for you. But in foreign policy, there is no such a power, right? So if Russia, for example, doesn't want to follow its promises and its agreement, nobody can enforce or force Russia to follow the agreements. That's probably what Trump administration doesn't realize. So, or maybe the administration realizes, but Trump as a personality is used to a bit different way of doing business. So I think Ukraine just needs to really reevaluate and readjust its strategy towards Trump administration and get full support of Europe, because now Ukraine is indispensable part of European security architecture. And I think they should talk as a single united front as much as it's possible, and protect European values and European unity in conversations with Trump administration. I think that would be the most probably relevant and adequate change of policy and strategy of Ukraine and Europe in dealing with this issue.
That's great. And yeah, I think you're right. And I think it remains to be seen how things will play out, obviously. But are you seeing any immediate concerns in terms of particular support that could be stopped straight away? Whether, we've heard about the intelligence sharing potentially being stopped. But in terms of some of maybe the technologies we discussed previously, that are you worried that any of that kind of capability may be affected in the short term?
Mm-hmm. So just yesterday, I had a briefing and conversation with the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States. So basically, it's the main agency which provides intelligence for Ukrainian army on deep strikes and movements of Russian forces in Ukrainian territory, occupied territory. And this is kind of information and intelligence that, U.S. systems cannot work without, like HIMARS, for example. So basically, they become, a pile of metal, useless without that information. Yeah. I perceive American people, most of them separately from the U.S. administration, current administration, and I felt a lot of support there. And honestly, like usual employees and people who work with this kind of project, let's say, they're really, really disappointed because they realize and they understand all the bad consequences of these decisions for Ukrainian people, most of all, and first of all, unfortunately. And, this decision spreads a bit further than just direct intelligence sharing, because they banned U.S. companies to share intelligence, like Maxar, for example. They're the biggest supplier of overhead intelligence, so satellite intelligence, basically. And it's needed everywhere. It's needed across all Ukrainian defense sector agencies, and it's like 14 agencies who use that information. It's not only about what we think, shooting and striking. That's a lot more, which helps to provide Ukrainian ability to defend itself. And speaking about Ukrainian technologies, unfortunately, as we discussed before, they're not so sophisticated. They're not so technologically advanced. Ukraine has kind of its own satellite, which was bought, by the way, on donations of Ukrainian people. But of course, it cannot compete and cover all the needs. So unfortunately, Ukraine drastically needs that information. And the sooner Ukrainian administration and Ukrainian political leadership make some moves towards Trump administration, the better for the people. And I'm just keeping fingers crossed that this approachment will happen sooner rather than later, Because, we discussed this on Friday, and I said, you know what? If I were Russia, I would just attack Ukraine straight away, because Europe, for Europe, it will take time to provide at least something, to ramp up its defense industry, together, to, unite at least major nations around some decisions, so they translate into some practical steps. Trump administration is pissed off. So basically, Ukraine is left without real practical supplies and support, and it's very vulnerable right now. So if I were Russia, I would just attack Ukraine straight away, and Russia would get the strongest negotiation position. And I'm pretty sure they realize it. So time is really, really important factor here. And I think this approachment should happen as fast as possible. I hope Ukrainian leadership realizes it and does some practical steps towards it.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. And I think, as you said, I think we're already seeing it play out exactly as you've said, that Russia would respond, and they do seem to have upped the level of attacks this week. And they must realise, as you said, that Ukraine's in a particularly vulnerable moment. So, we all have our fingers crossed along with you in terms of hopefully the rapprochement will happen, and we'll see the talks resume and support resume, and hopefully that vulnerability won't last long and the gap will be closed very quickly. So let's be optimistic, I suppose, at the moment, and hope that things turn out for the better.
Yep, let's be optimistic and pragmatic.
Yeah, absolutely. Kate, thank you so much for coming back on and just adding this part to the podcast. I think it was really important after those events that we saw, and this is really a great kind of way to just hopefully cap what we've discussed earlier and give people a bit more food for thought as they listen to this conversation and to have something to take away that we can focus on as we progress through the coming weeks and months.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your support for Ukrainian people as well. I really appreciate it.
When Kate and I had this conversation, we couldn't have imagined what would transpire the following day in the White House, and subsequently in London as the UK government moved swiftly to bring together a coalition of the willing to ensure Ukraine continues to receive support. I think it's worth reiterating some facts. Russia is the aggressor in this war, and neither Ukraine nor any other country did anything to provoke a full-scale invasion. Ukraine is suffering, but is far from destroyed, and in fact, as the conversation with Kate bears out, the Ukrainian Armed Forces continue to develop their capabilities to defend their country in the face of an existential threat. For me, the important points I took away from the conversation were around how Ukraine's armed forces have implemented commercial unmanned systems as well as C2 systems built within the country, such as Delta, to have an immediate impact on how they're able to maneuver and deliver effects on the battlefield. On top of this, it's instructive to see how the private sector, or rather civilian capabilities, have driven military innovation at high speed. Now, this is in extreme circumstances, yet it shows how militaries can adopt significant capabilities from the private sector, but they need to be delivered, tested, and iterated at pace. It raises the question of how to replicate battlefield testing outside of a conflict situation. Possibly a topic for another podcast episode. At the heart of all this are the people involved. Kate's research is sparked by the conversations she has and the deep impact of the war on her friends and family, and all the people of Ukraine, not just since 2022, but in the preceding years as well. If there's a silver lining to take away, perhaps it's the thought that the technology being developed for frontline use in Ukraine also has future civilian applications and could make the country a leader in, for example, the use of unmanned systems in different sectors of industry and different markets around the world. We hope that with the full support of its international partners, Ukraine can achieve a lasting and sustainable peace settlement
so that this future can arrive sooner rather than later.
Sensing the Signal is brought to you by Atreides, the behavioural analytics company. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can find out more about what we do at atreides.io.